The Torah, it's very clear. Abiding by the moral and religious teachings contained in the Torah is a requirement for the Jewish people's prosperity in our own land. And this requirement is present in the renewal of the covenant described in Parashat Nitzavim, from which our Torah reading for this morning is taken. Like the moment of Ma'amad Har Sinai, the revelation at Mount Sinai, Nitzavim is a crossroad in time. This moment constitutes an essential stage in the life of our people. At Nitzavim, the Torah warns us of what could happen if we live in the land of Israel but do not follow the Torah's teachings. Quote, "You will perish, and you will not last long in the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess. This day I call heaven and earth to witness regarding you. Life and death I have set before you, blessing and curse. Choose life so that you and your children may live, by loving, obeying, and staying close to Adonai, your God." End quote. It is a moment of trial when we must remember to choose what brings life into the world, because that is the only way to bring more hope into our future. This brit, this covenant, is binding upon all future generations of the Jewish people. No generation can say that they are excluded from the covenant or its demands. This warning is still valid for all of us who identify with the Jewish people, whether we live in the diaspora or in the state of Israel. If we heed its teachings, the covenant at Nitzavim can be a source of great hope for the future. But what happens when we fall short? Despair and apathy may ensue. In recent months, many of us have been troubled by the political and humanitarian situation in the state of Israel. Although we see hope in the thousands of Jewish people who have mobilized to protect democracy, both in Israel and here in America, just a few days ago outside the UN headquarters in New York City, there are also many who have lost hope that our dream of peaceful and a democratic Israel, where coexistence between the Jewish people and the Palestinian people is possible. I find it very hard to see how, as a people, we are heeding the words of Nitzavim. Doniel Hartman, the president of the Hartman Institute in Jerusalem, often talks about the relationships Jews have with the state of Israel as a combination of trouble, untroubled, and committed, uncommitted. Doniel Hartman considers himself a troubled, committed Zionist, meaning that he's both unconditionally committed to Israel's survival and troubled by the direction the government of Israel is taking. Hartman teaches, quote, "Today I am troubled because something very wrong is going on in our country, in Israel, because our commitment to human rights and equality, to treating all people as created in the image of God, is inconsistently applied in Judea, Samaria, and Gaza. I am troubled because Israel, however committed to peace, is no longer resolute in pursuing it." End quote. Why is one to be troubled, you may ask? Because the ideals contained in the covenant, the brit, that our ancestors swore to uphold that day at Nitzavim, cannot simply be pushed aside. I acknowledge that it is not everyone in Israel, but many Israeli Jews seem to act as if the Torah morals code does not apply to them. those who inflict the daily humiliations suffered by Palestinians living under occupation, or the settler groups who terrorize Palestinian farmers and who are rarely, if ever, punished, seem to believe that they can possess the land and act as they wish. I understand we cannot find hope in this, only troublesome feelings, despair, and apathy. As you may have guessed by now, I consider myself a troubled, committed Zionist. I know that many people, Jews and non-Jews alike, see themselves as committed to Israel and find a way not to be troubled by the actions of this or that Israeli government. Although I do respect that position, in my opinion, remaining untroubled is not compatible with the teachings of the Torah exemplified in Nitzavim. Some explain that they are not troubled because, quote, Israel offered peace to the Palestinian people, yet we had no partner in peace. Hearing those who are untroubled by the lack of consideration for the human rights of Palestinians diminishes our own hope. I understand why people in Israel and worldwide have very little hope that peace will come in our own time. The untroubled, committed approach, however, comes from a place of despair and apathy and not from a place of hope. If one tries something and it does not work, the hopeful thing to do is to try again, not to give up, right? No doubt, it is a challenge to see hope rising in the current situation in Israel. Daniel Hartman teaches that, quote, to be a Jew is to be troubled, to view one's life and one's society through an aspirational lens, always striving to be more, end quote. In other words, to be a troubled Zionist is to be a hopeful Zionist. Zionism as a cultural movement is an interpretation of Judaism was founded as a highly hopeful project. Hope defined the early days of Zionism. Hope is an essential part of the Jewish way of seeing the world. We call that in German Weltanschauung. David Arnau, in his book Choosing Hope, the Heritage of Judaism, traces the idea of hope in early Zionist thinkers. And one of them, a little-known German philosopher, Moses Hess, writes in 1862, quote, what we have to do at present for the regeneration of the Jewish nation is first to keep alive the hope of the political rebirth of our people, and next to reawaken that hope where it slumbers, end quote. Hope was part of the Zionist enterprise from the very beginning. Those of us who know a little about the history of Zionism will recall that the first agricultural school in Israel, then the Ottoman Palestine province, founded in 1870, was called Mikveh Israel, Hope of Israel. 80 years later, the first town in then Ottoman Palestine was called Petach Tikva, meaning Gateway of Hope. Mikveh and Tikva are two Hebrew words that mean hope. And finally, obviously, the elephant in the room, the very first thing that would come up to mind when discussing hope and Israel is its national anthem, Ha-Tikva, hope. In 1878, the Jewish poet Naftali Herz Imber wrote a 9-stanza poem, Tikvatenu, our hope. David Arnau points out an interesting fact about the poem's ideology that most people are not aware of. The phrase, Od lo avda tikvatenu, our hope is not yet lost, is based on a verse from the prophet Ezekiel, but not a quote from Ezekiel. So here's the verse from Ezekiel. Vayomer Eli, and I was told by God, O mortal, these bones are the whole house of Israel. You know, famous bones stuff in Ezekiel, everybody knows about it a little bit. And they say, our bones are dried up. Ve'avda tikvatenu. And our hope is gone. We are doomed. As you can see, the text from Ezekiel is not hopeful at all. Imber contradicted the famous prophet. And furthermore, the poet transferred the responsibility of hoping from God to humans. The young idealists who founded the Zionist movement decided to take history into their own hands and to be radically hopeful, which was a daring thing to do then. It needs to be a daring thing nowadays, again and again. So it's clear that when it comes to Israel, our hope score, if we would take a score, Israel would take the test, it would be very low. What happened to hope? Can we still sing Hatikva and feel that the future will be better? Where has Tikvateinu vanished? If it's not in the actions of the Israeli government, where then are the people who are working for a hopeful future in the state of Israel found? Evidently, the massive protests in Israel are hopeful. There is more. Every time I visit Israel, I learn about a new NGO or a nonprofit that is doing something new and hopeful, something that builds bridges between the many divides in Israeli society, something that keeps hope rising. The sad fact is that probably these people are nobody that you and I ever see or hear in the news. News from Israel highlights conflict and discord. Yet there are many people who try hard to fulfill the founding promises of building a fair society based on Jewish values, values which we know are about justice, human rights, equality, and fairness. People who keep Hatikva alive in the wider society are called super empowered, hopeful individuals. And I'm sure there is an acronym for that. SEHI. This comes from Dr. Snyder, the KU psychologist and researcher, who taught, quote, believe the future will be better than the present for everyone, and that can make it happen. They, these individuals, the super empowered, believe that changing the world is a realistic goal despite every obstacle imaginable. In Choosing Hope, David Arnau included a whole chapter about Israel, dealing not with national security or geopolitical issues, but with conversations with activists about what sustained hope for them and their community. Back in 2018, Arnau visited Israel and interviewed people from all walks of life. And I recommend you read this account. Again, the Hope QR code will now, after today, have a link to Arnau's work as well. But this morning, I want to share just one story of one super empowered, hopeful individual. His name is Rabbi Eli Ofran, a modern Orthodox rabbi, psychologist, and educator. He leads an exciting project at Kibbutz Be'erot Yitzchak, a religious kibbutz close to Ben Gurion Airport. The project is called in Hebrew Mechinat Ruach HaSadeh, spirit or wind of the field. Ruach HaSadeh is 1-year experimental educational program for modern Orthodox high school students that precedes military service. Rabbi Ofran directs the preparatory and thinks that there is a problem for society when Orthodox children, quote, grow up in their own world. He says, they are very comfortable but know nothing about the complexities about this country. They've never had interactions with secular Jews or Arabs. At Ruach Hasadeh, we want them to learn what a complicated country it is to make connections with different kinds of people, end quote. The message that Rabbi Ofran wants the Orthodox youth to get is one of petichut umechuyavut, meaning openness and religious obligation. I know this doesn't look like a lot, but even a little openness within parts of the Orthodox community in Israel constitutes a story of hope in a country that is divided between secular and religious very deeply down. Stories of hope often go unnoticed or unreported, but we must lift these stories if our hope is to rise. What caught my eye about the story in Arnaud's, when he mentioned Rabbi Ofran's latest book called Torah Shel HaNefesh, the Torah of the Soul. And Rabbi Ofran has a chapter about a verse in the book of Genesis, 49:18, and if you know it by heart, I'll be surprised because I had to look it up. And it is Lishuati Kiviti Adonai, meaning I hope for your deliverance, O Adonai. This is the only verse in the Torah that contains a form of the common Hebrew word root for hope, the only one. And guess what? The chapter begins with an overview of Dr. Snyder's work on hope, stressing the importance of a goal, determination, and devising strategies to reach it. Back in 2019, Ofran's book was number 4 in Haaretz. It's like, the Times of Israel. It's called Haaretz. And they have a bestseller list. It's number 4, which means that hundreds of thousands of Israelis have now been exposed to Dr. Snyder's work on hope, from KU to Tel Aviv and to the world. During the interview, Rabbi Ofran said, "For me, hope is a pair of glasses that I decide to wear. It's like a Rorschach test. What you see in it, it says more about you than about what's in the card itself." There have always been two parties in Judaism about this. And he's referring to the arguments between Hillel and Shammai. One group's always had more hope and one less. I couldn't do this work unless I believed that change is possible, end quote. I love this metaphor. Hope is like a pair of glasses. Whether we put the glasses on or not, it is our choice. A very powerful pair of glasses indeed, I will say, because it can help troubled, committed Zionist people like me see the change for the better that lies ahead. Projects like Rabbi Ofran's are not a magical solution for the lack of hope many of us experience in thinking about Israel. The good thing is that there are many individuals and groups in Israel who, like Rabbi Ofran, are working towards hope and are doing a lot of hope rising. And they are very intentional about it. They know they are working towards hope. They know that by giving people goals and ways to get there, they are enhancing hope and building a better future. We don't have the time, but Arnaud's book has many more examples. And I suggest you check those out as well. Whether we search for hope in our personal lives, the life of our congregation, or that of a whole country, the basic principles are the same. We must be honest about what hinders our hope from rising, then set goals, small at first, and then find pathways. We need to pick up our hopeful glasses and try to see where hope might be rising. The call of Nitzavim challenges each generation to follow the highest moral teachings of the Torah in this land and in the land of Israel, which I know is not always possible, but we shouldn't give up. I pray that in 5784, we will turn those who bring us hope in a better future for the state of Israel, for hope in the heritage of Judaism. For hope is indeed our heritage, and each generation must do their part so that Tikvatenu, our hope, rises again and again. Chatima Tova, everybody. Have a hopeful new year.